Following the debt-invoking French and Indian War, which ceased in 1763, the British Parliament desperately needed money to support their worldwide colonizations. Thus, the British Parliament enacted the Stamp Act of 1765 on colonial America in an attempt to eradicate their debts. However, many colonists began questioning these measures, demonstrated by mass protests, as they believed that the British Parliament could not tax the colonies without any legitimate representation in Parliament, hence the famed slogan, "No taxation without representation." In response, the British Parliament drafted the Declaratory Act of 1766, which affirmed their rights to govern colonial America, marking the beginning of conflict that would ultimately evolve into the American Revolution. Several years later, after many other acts were imposed on colonial America, in 1773, the British Parliament enacted yet another tax in the form of the Tea Act, which would inevitably become a breaking point for the colonists' complicit cooperation with the British Parliament. Following the passage of the Tea Act and massive outcry from the American people, on December 16th of 1773, in Boston, Massachusetts, in an event that would infamously be remembered as the Boston Tea Party, a group of patriots dumped approximately 340 chests of tea into the Boston harbor. Angered by this destructive form of protest, the British Parliament enacted 4 laws, historically remembered as the Intolerable Acts, of which 3 were directly purposed in punishing Massachusetts. The first of the Intolerable Acts was the Boston Port Act, passed on March 31st, 1774, which essentially closed Boston's ports until order was no longer in question and the dumped tea was paid off. However, since it was a corporate punishment on all of Boston for the acts of one small group, it instead angered more people who otherwise would have been loyal to Britain. On May 20th, the second act, the Massachusetts Government Act, was passed, taking away the Charter of Massachusetts, in turn handing full governance to King George III and the British Parliament. Furthermore, town meetings were reduced to 1 permitted annually, which severely upset the colonists of Massachusetts. Moreover, the extent of anger towards Britain spread through the other 12 colonies, as many feared that the British Parliament would try to attain full control over their governments, analogous to what underwent in Massachusetts. On May 20th, 1774, the Third Act, the Administration of Justice Act, was also passed, allowing the royal governor to request for trials of British officers to be held in Britain or other colonies of the British Empire. It was met with much disdain among colonial America, with George Washington titling it the Murder Act, as it allowed British officers to commit crimes in the colonies and escape conviction in heavily biased trials held elsewhere. The Fourth Act, the Quartering Act, was enforced among all 13 colonies, allowing the governors to house British soldiers in unoccupied buildings. A substantial amount of colonists believed that their natural rights had been infringed upon, thus creating tension between Britain and colonial America. Many colonists abandoned their loyalty to the British Crown, in turn favoring independence. Following the acts, the Continental Congress founded the Continental Association, a mass boycott of British products. They demanded that if the Intolerable Acts were not repealed, colonial American goods would be no longer sent to Britain. The Intolerable Acts were an attempt from the British Parliament to pay for debts from the French and Indian War and isolate revolutionaries from the Boston Tea Party. However, it consequently backfired, turning many colonists against British rule, ultimately igniting the fire that would erupt into the American Revolutionary War.